With a history dating back over a century, it's no surprise that so much anime gets cast aside and left forgotten to the winds of time. I think we all suffer from the problem of an ever-growing planning list, but what of all the series that never even make it that far? It's impossible to like something that you don't even know exists, and with how quickly the seasonal chart churns through series, the halls of oblivion are always accepting new applicants. That being said, I personally hate to see good work get forgotten, and with the help of a random anime generator, have made it my mission to see what I can dredge up and give a second chance. I'm going to make my way through the backlog one series at a time and determine if these forgotten titles were deservedly cast aside or are worthy of a second lease on life. The rules here are simple. I'll generate 3 1 to 2 core anime at random and give them 3 episodes to see if they're worth seeing to completion. There's no limit on genre, age, or quality, and I'm only really imparting an episode restriction for my own sanity and to make sure episodes come out on time. With that in mind, let's see what we've got up first. Ever since I was a kid, I've always had a soft spot for the fantasy genre. There's nothing quite like a good fantasy world to invest your time into, though it wasn't until I grew up that I really came to appreciate how much work goes into making one of these worlds work, as well as the consequences of doing it poorly. On that note, 2014's Chaika The Coffin Princess is an action fantasy light novel adaptation about the titular Chaika's quest to revive her recently slain father, Emperor Gauze. Along the way, she's joined by Saboteur siblings Toru and Akari Akira, who serve as her protectors with their magic powers that make them stronger. Somehow. Which brings us neatly to Chaika's most glaring issue, and that's the fact that its world building kinda sucks. There's a lot of interesting ideas here when presented in isolation, from Chaika's magic guns to Gauze's severed limbs, to the variety of side characters that constitute the world's police force. However, the story does an absolute bare-bones job of convincingly stitching them all together. It never really feels coherent in the way something like Made in Abyss does, and fails to build the sort of intrigue that is mandatory for an adventure series like this. To only further the problem, Chaika's cast is extremely inconsistent. Designs reach for all manners of inspiration, which can work, but only when you've got a strong sense of place in your world, and only Chaika really feels like a truly original character in both design and utility. Then again, that's all the series really needs. I know I've been dragging it hard for the last bit, but I'd be lying if I said Chaika didn't have moments of genius. Chaika herself is a godsend for the series, and is enough to make it stand out amongst a sea of alternatives. Her clumsy yet endearing nature can slice through some of the downtime in the series that the author insists on filling with inane dialogue that only barely furthers the plot. Even her presence in scenes is usually enough for the animators and writers to just have some fun and break up the otherwise tedious nature of things. The series sets up the mystery of her existence pretty nicely, and as a centralizing plot point, she is at least able to give the world some grounding for which it can build the rest of its narrative off of. Throw an animation at the hands of Studio Bones that knows when to hit the gas, and Chaika ends up being a fairly watchable show, albeit with hints of something better lingering vaguely on your palate once you part ways. It does come off as one of those 2-season advertisements for the source material that ends on a cliffhanger, but what else do you expect from an early 2010s show? Get what you pay for. I feel like there are 2 types of anime fans out there. People who would die by harem anime, and those that would die before ever touching one. While the genre is less prominent in its purest form these days, it's undeniable that back in the day, they were everywhere. You really couldn't go 5 minutes around late 2000s and early 2010s anime without stumbling across something in the genre, and like everything that gets popular, that leads to a lot of derivative works. That brings us to 2010's Demon King Daimao, one of the many magic high school harems that dominate the era. Daimao follows the escapades of transfer student Akito Sai and his dream of becoming an archpriest so he can be a good boy doing good things. The only challenge is that the We Have Sorting Hat at home at his We Have Hogwarts at home has professed that he's going to be the Demon King, which is kind of the opposite of what he wants to do. Will he give in to fate or push past it and live out his dreams? Find out in the story full of busts, butts, and so many other things that I simply can't show on YouTube. I actually kind of dig Daimao's concept. The series milks some pretty decent jokes out of it, and has solid enough comedic timing to even land some of them. As cliche as it is, I really do enjoy this archetype of the guy just trying to do his best while the world does everything it can to stop him, And that degree of madness is what I think lies at the heart of many 2000s comedy anime. However, Daimao suffers the same fate that a lot of these shows have. It's just too horny for its own good. Believe me, I'm no prude. I still maintain that Interspecies Reviewers is one of the funniest things to come out in 2020, but you need to be tasteful in your smut. Daimao's aggressively horny and persistent with its many panty shots and general nudity. It distracts from the overall series and gives the air that all the merit to its plot is tertiary to trying to get the viewer's rocks off. Worst part is that it frequently comes at the expense of an already bland harem that needs everything they can to stand out. The chipper redhead, who is constantly naked to facilitate her invisibility powers, the green-haired android whose off-switch comes in the form of a bunny tail on her ass, and the purple-haired student council president who gives most of her exposition while in her underwear for some reason, are somehow not the worst offenders. Now, that title goes to the blue-haired warrior girl, who I swear spends more time being naked than clothed in the first 3 episodes. Actually, most of the girls might be like that, but it becomes particularly egregious with her when her whole shtick is how she's a strong and independent person, only for the show to stick a camera up her ass. It's just distractingly and unnecessarily horny, and while the show obviously isn't much about it, I'd go so far as to say it isn't exactly gaining much by having it. Just stick to your campy, not Harry Potter plot and have a nice day. Yeah, I know that sounds a lot like I watch hentai for the plot, but I'm sticking with it. Sue me. Space is really cool. Anime and sci-fi have a long and rich history, and there's been anime girls traveling to space for as long as this medium has been around. Anime has given rise to some of the most mature and thought-provoking stories known to man, and so it's particularly frustrating when it does the exact opposite. 2017's elDLIVE is what happens when you look at Eden Zero and wonder what happens when you replace all the fairy tale parts with a store-brand sugar-free alternative. I guess technically it did come out first, but that's no real excuse for just how miserable it flops its execution. There's nothing worse than a show failing so miserably to be cool, and to that point, elDLIVE is tripping over itself to cram its time limit with as much of that as possible. elDLIVE is a story about Chuda Kokonose, an everyday loser of an anime protagonist who one day is asked to join the space police to do space police things. To make sure he doesn't become space splatter, he's teamed up with his cute female classmate, who also happens to be space police, has a no-nonsense personality, and makes it very clear how much he hates Chuda's guts. Might as well get it out of the way here, but these two have terrible chemistry together. Girl character has such an abrasive personality that it's hard to even root for them, even though the plot obviously wants her there just to sell merch, and so the Chuda self-inserts have someone to pine for. Although, on that front, there are so many better alternatives out there than to self-insert into elDLIVE and simp for her. Ignoring the Space Police side class, who are largely forgotten imitations of better characters from other series, Chuda also is joined in an escapade by Happy the Chest Penis, a design decision that I'm convinced the author spent many long nights trying to justify to himself. Okay, I know my doctor told me to lay off the negativity, but if you couldn't tell, I just can't find much in elDLIVE that's all the worth praising. I guess the ED is pretty good, but when that's all you've got, your series is in serious trouble. The writing is just so hopelessly juvenile and squanders anything that it has going for it, with played out jokes and gimmick characters that just hurt to watch. This isn't to mention the general art direction either. Besides the hopelessly grotesque designs across the board, elDLIVE's color palette, with its over-reliance on pale purples and greens, are only the tip of the iceberg here. I know generic pattern backgrounds are common in a lot of shows, but elDLIVE takes it one step further with these animated line backgrounds that pop in more frequently than they need to tank the already flimsy art direction. Lackluster backgrounds and lazy design work, like the aforementioned chest penis, are but the icing on a cake that borders on impossible to watch. That's to speak nothing of the writing and the characters, but at this point I think you get the idea. Something something dead horses, or however that saying goes. Despite my apprehensions, I did see Chaika through to completion. Through 2 seasons, it still struggles to establish its world, but by focusing on the ever-unraveling mystery of Chaika's existence, it is able to meander its way to a decent enough conclusion that wraps things up nicely. Makes sense, given that the light novel finished not too long after the 2nd season, but with these types of shows you never really know. Chaika also continues to be a highlight in the series, and her comedic potential is balanced out by the Agura siblings covering for some of her more lackluster character moments. Groundbreaking? No, and certainly not without its problems, but if you're looking for a decent mid-2010s action-adventure series, then you may just get a kick out of it. I really wanted to like Demon King Daimao. I liked its concept, but unfortunately the horniness was just too unforgiving. It's distractingly persistent, and if I'm only going to be watching it alone in my room late at night, then I'll just find a show that mixes its ideas a lot better than this one does. The plot isn't anything special, and I'm sure I can get something far better from the litany of other offerings in the genre. And yeah, to wrap things up, I dropped elDLIVE. While I can appreciate the attempt, it does fail on almost all fronts. The production is subpar, the design decisions in both its art and writing department make for a truly awful show that really has no right being as bad as it is. I'm baffled that something could be worse than a horny 2000s harem, but by God did this show do just that. I'm going back to Eden Zero. With that, I hope you enjoyed this video. Do you agree with me? Do you not agree with me? Have I given you some recommendations to watch in the near future? And how can I improve this series going forward? Let me know in the comments below, and until next month, remember to stay salty.